Welcome to the Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva, and today we're going to try to get some insight on how Ivy League universities do their college admissions. Our guest today is Hope Murtaugh, and she's a former Princeton University Assistant Director for Admissions, and today she is now an independent college consultant. And welcome, Hope.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back in Princeton, even if it's only virtually.
No problem. So I usually start out with my guests with where they went to college. So if you could just tell everyone where you started out at.
Well, I actually went to Princeton, and I came to Princeton as a graduate of a small high school in South Carolina, and I had never been farther north than Washington, D.C., when I packed up a small Toyota Corolla and drove up the East Coast with my parents until we saw Gothic architecture in downtown Princeton, and we said, this must be it. And they dropped me off for freshman week. It was a wonderful experience. It was not easy all the time. Freshman year, I certainly questioned myself a lot. You know, how did I get here, and is this the right place for me? But I settled in sophomore year, and it certainly was a changing experience in my life.
Great. So after you graduated, what direction did you take?
Well, I thought that I was going to go to law school, but I was very busy my senior year. I was leading a very large student organization. I probably spent 40 hours a week. It was a drama group called the Triangle Club, and I didn't have time to apply to law school. So I took the LSAT and then went to work in New York City as a paralegal. And after about a year, I realized that I would probably love law school and not enjoy the practice of law at all. So I started working for the United Way, which, a charitable organization in New York.
Yeah.
And eventually I put a resume on file with Princeton because my husband and I were living in Plainsboro, only 4 miles from the campus.
Okay.
And we were commuting into New York City every day, which is, of course, a long commute there and back by train. So I put a resume on file with the university.
Okay. And you ended up, I guess, in the admissions office?
Yes, I got a phone call out of the blue from the new dean of admission at the time, and this was in the late 80s, 1988, Fred Hargadon. And I don't know if you've heard that name, but he is one of the greats, was one of the great deans of admission. He was the dean of admission at Stanford for a long time.
Wow.
And then at Princeton. And Fred called me up and said, I see you're a recent graduate and you're interested in working for the development arm of the university, but have you ever thought about the admissions office? And I said, why no? And he said, would you come over and talk to me about it? And I said, why yes. And so I went to the campus, and he was new on campus that year, and he hired 3 women who had graduated fairly recently.
Okay.
And I was one of them.
So tell me, what's the process that Princeton University or any Ivy League school would take for admissions? Back then, when you were working there, what is the process that they take for admissions?
Right. I think that the fundamentals are going to be very common across most highly selective colleges. And I'm talking about colleges that have more qualified and desirable applicants than they can accommodate.
Okay.
And the first thing they need to do is they need to divide their applicant pool into rough tiers or levels of ability and accomplishment. And so one of the things that they're probably going to have is some type of way privately, to themselves, to divide their applicant pool based on the numbers that students have, and those would be, of course, your test scores, rank in class if it's provided, GPAs, that kind of thing, the rigor of the curriculum, which you can simply count the number of courses that are what we would call solid academic courses,
Okay.
and calculate what does it take to be in the top 1 or 2,000 of these amazingly talented students who have come through our front door.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to try to divide their applicant pool based on those credentials. And that's not while it's based on objective criteria, it's not It's not a clear-cut decision in every case where an applicant falls. There can be fuzziness. Okay, a student who has very high test scores but a lower GPA, or students who have very high GPAs but their test scores don't fall in the top few thousand in your applicant pool. So the question arises, well, where do you put this person? How do you rank them? And so that's going to be the first thing, is what rough level of our applicant pool does this person fall into academically? And if you look at Princeton's information, in particular, I'm really happy with how transparent they are now. They do a freshman class profile, and on that freshman class profile, which is readily available every year, updated on the web, you can see, I think it's about 5 layers of test scores and GPAs, and they show you the percentages of students who are admitted from each layer, from each tier. And so even though we hear, oh, Harvard only admitted 5%, or Stanford only admitted this percent, really, if you look at their layers, you'll see that by layer, the top layer is being admitted at a much higher percentage. So if the overall admit rate is 7%, the top tier might be admitted at 11%, and the bottom tier might only be admitted less than 1%.
So are there just categories of different students? Do you have your athletes? Do you have your fine arts students?
That would come in the next step, which for Princeton was considering the non-academic ability. So what I'm talking about are just the academic objective numbers. Okay. Where does this student fall in our applicant pool? Is he or she in the top 2,000-3,000? Okay. Or the bottom 2,000 or 3,000? Because
and so how many students are usually accepted every year at Princeton University? Is there a range that they have?
Well, it comes down to the science of the yield, which I'm sure you've heard of, the idea how many offers of admission can we extend, and then how many people will accept them. Okay. And it's a subjective science of predicting, subjective science, because you're trying to guess the decisions that people will make. But overall, yields stay fairly steady. So if you want 1,000 people in your freshman class and you have a 50% yield, typically you have a 50% yield, then you would admit 2,000.
I got you. Okay.
So one of the neat things about Princeton is that Fred Hargadon was convinced that Princeton could do what it does for more, freshmen, more students, and the university did over the last 20 years. They expanded. They actually expanded their student body, and I think that's very admirable, that they can look around and say, we have the resources to do what we're doing for more students, and it is crazy the level of students we are turning away. Let's take more. Wow. And do more. So.
And so give an example to parents what they need to do to get their son or their daughter into an Ivy League school. Is there a process that they would have to do?
If there were a process, then I'm sure I could write a best-selling book. Unfortunately, the answer is that there isn't a clear process. What you see in students who stand out in an Ivy League pool, okay, and this is a pool that is full of valedictorians, for example, thousands of valedictorians, a pool that has students who have written best-selling software programs, who have written books, who have really done some amazing things. There are many science competitions and math competitions, okay, where they've already stood out on a global level. So how does an average person approach standing out in that pool? If they have the credentials, okay, the academic credentials, they've taken the most rigorous course of study that's available to them, and they've done well, they've prepared for their tests, and they've done well on their tests. The single best way to stand out for admission anywhere is to pursue a very distinct passion and show individual initiative in some way. I would say that it's typical for students who've been admitted. You can say that they've looked around them at the communities that they're part of, whether it's their school or their church or their neighborhood. They've looked around, they've noticed problems, and then they've done something to to make it better.
Wow.
And sometimes that problem only affects one person. But
Interesting.
it's I'm trying to think of an example. One student that I worked with who is now at Yale was from a French culture where they don't do as many extracurricular activities because they are literally in school until 4:30 every day.
Oh my God.
Yeah, different cultures around the world have different priorities. And so you might have thought this child would be at a disadvantage applying to an American system where they highly value extracurricular activities and the character development that comes through those and the opportunities to display leadership and make a difference, for people around them. But one of the things that she noticed was that her particular grade level was full of cliques. She said that it was a bunch of small groups. And so in an attempt to build bridges between those groups, she started hosting themed parties and special events that had some type of activity that kind of shook up the cliquishness. A costume party, for example, where people kind of break down your daily inhibitions. And it was very effective in building bridges, making new friendships. They just learned more about each other. And she personally knit that class together, kind of part of the social fabric. She was part of the ones who wove a social fabric in that class.
Yes.
So what college wouldn't want her? Fred Hargadon used to call these candidates interstitial candidates. They fill in the spaces between other people. If you have Einstein in one corner of the room and you have Yo-Yo Ma playing, beautiful music in the other corner, who are the people who bring those ones together?
Well, so that brings up a question then. There are a lot of parents out there that talk about, the Ivy League. They categorize people in certain ethnic departments of how they do admissions. So African Americans, you're Asians, you're whites. And there's quotas at those schools. That's what I've been hearing out there. Is there some type of quota that Princeton or any university looks at, or is it just based off of what the application comes in and what they're writing about?
There's not a specific quota, but what I would say is that there's an awareness of building a community in the freshman class that is diverse in all ways. So they are actively looking for who is that brilliant orphan, who's been raised in an orphanage. Where is that, brilliant person with some kind of diverse background? And I always tell parents never to forget that this is not a pure meritocracy where somebody is able to rank order 2,000 kids from number 1 to number 20,000 or 2.
Right.
It just doesn't. It's crazy. Look around you at your kid's high school class and say, can you rank order those 400 kids from number 1 to number 400? No, you cannot. And Ivy League admission offices have never said that that's what they're doing. It is not a pure meritocracy. So you do have to forget that. What they're doing is creating a community. And think of it as a fixed size pie. And you've got different slices. You've got your slice that's your football team. You've got your slice that's your orchestra or your triangle club, where you want your dancers and your drama students. You've got different slices of this pie, and that includes race. It includes income strata.
So you're not. There isn't one particular quota out there or anything like that. It really comes down to what that student is providing. So not every kid at Princeton University or Yale or Harvard has a 4.0 grade point average, and that's it. There are some kids at Princeton that probably have a 3.2 grade point average.
Very few, but yes, it can happen. That bottom tier of the applicant pool might be kids with a 3.5.
Okay.
So there's not a specific quota, but as they go through the process, they're making individual decisions. And then at the end of the process, they'll look and say, okay, what did I do? Do I have enough students who are going to support my orchestra? Do I have enough anthropologists for that department?
Gotcha.
Have I admitted the right number of engineering students? And gee, what's the male-female ratio in my class? And they will look at racial breakdown as part of that.
Wow.
What if they went through the process and underadmitted, say drastically underadmitted women in engineering or something? They're going to have to go back and correct that. And that means admitting more women in engineering.
Right.
And
Now,
that means dipping down, right?
so when does the process start for each class? So it's not the senior class that's in high school. Are they looking at that class, or are they looking into the junior class as the class that they start preparing for all of this at the high school level?
Right. At the high school level, you definitely should be preparing by your junior year. And in fact, if you think about it, when are you going to visit colleges when the students are going to be on campus?
Mm-hmm.
It might even be spring of sophomore year. You might want to window shop, I call it. Just take
Wow.
a look around at some places. This is what a small liberal arts college looks like, or this is what a big urban university looks like. Or you think you seem to be good in math and science, go visit some engineering programs and see with your own eyes the kinds of projects that those kids are doing. So I encourage sophomores to window shop. I encourage juniors to be seriously visiting, especially during the school year if possible. So that is when it starts. And then, of course, if you think about it, the college admission cycle begins really the summer after the junior year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
So,
they'll be done by December.
so tell me then, you're an independent college advisor now.
Right.
What does that mean to parents that are out there?
Well, I think that what it means is that it's very difficult to get the level of advice that parents strongly hunger for. Um, there are private schools who have full-time college counselors. There are a few public schools, and I think in the Northeast you'll see some full-time college counselors. But for most of the country, college counseling is a very small percentage of what a guidance counselor is responsible for doing. When I was at Princeton, I was in charge of the Southeast, okay, of the
Okay.
American Southeast, obviously, because I am from the Southeast. And I always tell people I never walked through the door of a private school in the Southeast that did not have a full-time college counselor. And I never walked through the door of a public school in the Southeast that had a full-time college counselor, with the exception of the residential governor's schools for science and math.
Gotcha. So,
So you
so
see, there's just not a lot of resource out there in the school system to meet the level of advice I think that parents hunger for. And about just a little over a quarter of the college-going seniors every year end up having to hire somebody directly, like me. And
wow,
a lot of people like me do a lot of pro bono work. I did pro bono work for 10 years here. And in fact, in South Carolina, I pretty much only do pro bono work.
wow. So what's a typical day for you then?
Oh, well, in the in the winter, the fall and winter when people are writing furiously, I might meet with 3 to 5 students by Skype
Okay.
for half hour to an hour and a half each, brainstorming essay ideas, talking to them about who they are, what are their unique personal qualities, and how can they get them to come out in an essay.
Hmm.
And then I would also have hundreds of emails going back and forth with different drafts. And it's very important. Ethically, I cannot write an essay. I do not want to write an essay. I don't want to. I don't want to suggest a word. It takes a lot more time, Anthony, for me to talk to you and say, "Why do you do this? Really dig deep. What did you feel when you accomplished that, or what did you feel when you saw that child, and how did you feel later? Tell me." Making them search for the right word
Yeah.
and getting them to analyze their emotions and their thought processes, and then getting it out on paper. It's a real growth process. And I always tell juniors, please write. If you can write, journal, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
and start getting that type of writing flowing, because they're rarely taught that in high school. They're taught, how to write an English paper or a history paper.
So how early do you start with these high school kids?
I think that in the earlier years, freshman or sophomore years, you can do curriculum advising, you can do test planning just to make sure that they are on the right timetable and that they don't, trip up on something. it's very important not to go into your senior year thinking that you want to do engineering and then realizing that the mono that you had in your sophomore year that knocked you out of the math track means that you're not going to be able to complete some calculus before you graduate. I'd rather talk to you as a sophomore, realize you actually need to go to summer school and get back on that high math track.
Yeah.
Every year I talk to students whose doors have been closed to some degree because of curriculum decisions or other decisions they made earlier. Also, the summers are really valuable times for exploring those passions, for finding ways to give back to your community. And so I'd love to be giving kids some advice. Think creatively about what can you do in the summer after your freshman year or sophomore year. One of my favorite things to do is to brainstorm with kids about what makes them special, what makes them unique, and what talents do they have, and then how do they give back to the community with them? Because conscious development of character is really important to the admission process.
Now, do you find that being that you're a former Ivy League admissions person, that you tend to get a lot of kids that want to go to the Ivy Leagues that work with you?
I get some of those, and I also get kids who have higher needs, I would say. When you have a kid who maybe has a learning difference and is truly, truly brilliant, but hasn't been able to perform at the right level in the classroom in high school, so they're not proving that brilliance through the typical hoops that we all jump through.
Yeah.
I think kids like that often need a private counselor because they need somebody who can work with them very closely on what their options are. And sometimes we see things that haven't been diagnosed yet, and we're not therapeutic. I'm not someone who can diagnose something, but I can recognize when someone may need a thorough evaluation.
Gotcha. So, how do parents get in touch with you if they wanted to talk to you on a personal level? Did they just email you, or?
I think that's probably the best way. We do have a website. I work with a group of colleagues out of the main offices in Connecticut. We have offices elsewhere as well. But the website is www.dunbarconsultants.com. So Dunbar is spelled D-U-N-B-A-R. Consultants.com. You can see the whole team there. And another good reference for people is to go to the National Professional Association for Independent Educational Consultants. It's called IECA, and that will give you a nationwide directory of people who have been accepted into membership there. So a reputable group.
Are there people like yourself around the world too? I mean, there are kids from China and Japan doing this kind of stuff as well?
Yes, there are. Maybe even more so overseas than here, because people clearly recognize that they don't understand how the admission process works in the United States. Worldwide, the norm is that you have a national exam, you take the exam, and how well you do on that simply rank orders you and you are slotted in for a university. That's a very common scenario, and that is not what we do here. Right. It's one of the reasons that the world is beating a path to our door, because there's always a place for somebody here in this country to go to college.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. So we're basically almost coming out to just a few minutes left. Okay. Basically, what do you want to give to the parents that are out there, being that you were a former admissions person and now a consultant in the admissions process pretty much? What do you want to tell the parents out there? What's important to them to help their sons or their daughters to go on to the next level?
I would emphasize that even in my own parenting, I don't want to parent out of fear. I see a lot of what I call fear-based parenting. Real worry that their children are not going to be competitive if they don't go to a school that has a big name brand recognition, or just kind of that worry is driving a lot of the decision-making process at this time. And I think I would encourage them that searching for a college and applying to a college can be very positive. It can be a process of self-discovery for the child. I would also tell parents that it's going to be difficult for them emotionally if they have the typical age span. If your parents are in your 40s or 50s, you're going through what some researchers have called middle-essence, like adolescence, only middle-aged, middle-essence.
Sure.
And you're asking yourself, have I been the parent I wanted to be? Have I done what I wanted to do? Have I done what I needed to do with my life? And then the child is asking, they're 17, they're 18, they're asking the same questions. Where am I going? What do I want to do with my life? And there's a lot of angst in this whole process because college admissions pokes right at those tender spots for parents and children. It's the only decision about your child that as a parent, you don't have any say-so. And a lot of parents desperately search for that, for some traction, to have some input into this decision. So I would say relax, take a breath. Your child is going to be successful. Look at their qualities and believe in them. And it's not so much where they go to college, it's what they do once they're there.
And it doesn't matter if it's an Ivy League university or if it's just a small school in wherever.
Often, children will excel more in a different environment than an Ivy League. An Ivy League or a near Ivy is amazing, fantastic, wonderful classmates, amazing opportunities, and it's pretty easy to be average or in the bottom half of the class there. I'm sure I was in the bottom half of the class at this. So, there's got to be a bottom half of the class at Harvard, right?
Yeah, great.
So, you know what? My oldest two have gone to our big state university, and I'm watching them excel. They know the professors in the department, despite the
Right.
fact that the department has, that the whole university has thousands and thousands of students. So,
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming to my show. I appreciate
thank
it. And thank you. So you've been watching The Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva. Until next time.